we'll talk about why we think that you're getting smarter with operator training simulators. But I also, I put the title there because I thought it was catchy, and we had a lot of competition from some other sessions, so I knew I had to have a catchy title in order to lure people into this session. So my name is Janice Abel, and I'm an analyst with ARC Advisory Group, and I've been there for 3 years, and this is actually my third forum. And at ARC, I've been focused on the operator training simulators. We just did a study in that area. Collaborative production management, or MES, which is, it's the same thing, CPM, MES, we call it. And enterprise manufacturing intelligence, or EMI. And I'm also doing a session right after this on EMI. So if you're interested, we'd love to have you come as well. So, and also I did some work in the anti-counterfeiting area. In my background, I have a degree in chemistry and also a degree in chemical engineering and also a degree in business administration, an MBA. So it just gives you a quick synopsis of my background. I worked in the process industries for 26 years before ARC. So what I'd like to talk about today is some of the training types, which I'm sure everybody in this room, I have a feeling that people are, there's more experts in this room than we can count, and talk about operator training simulators in very general terms, just to frame the session to get us started. And I have a couple of experts with me that I'll introduce, as we get the panel and as they start speaking, so just to save time. So we have a number of challenges, drivers, and strategies, and we'll talk about that. And a lot of the information that I'm going to show to you I received from the study as well as from a survey that we did. And so I'll talk about one of the things that kept coming up is, well, how do you justify OTS? And in some industries, it's very clear-cut. They're regulated. They have to do OTS. But in other industries, it's not as clear-cut. So we can talk a little bit about that. There was a recent study that was done, a recent article that was written about the actual costs and how they justified it. So we'll summarize that as well. And also look at the best practice and strategies for operations training survey. So I guess we kind of have a nice group here, so hopefully we can get some good discussion going at the end. It's not too large, so I kind of like that. So hopefully we'll get a lot of interest in things, and there's a lot going on in the operator training survey field that we found. Some of the things that we looked at in the survey was we looked at, what types of training do people do? They do traditional training. They still do that today. They also do computer-based training, operator training, and then simulator training, which is where we're going to focus today. And we identified it in the study as both generic, which would be process-specific, like a unit op or something like that, that's fairly standard in a plant that would kind of mimic that. It might not be exactly your plant or exactly your unit operation, but it would be generic enough, or it was enough so that the operator could actually simulate it, you could make a change on it, and the operator could respond to it. So that was how we defined a generic. We also had another type that we called the high-fidelity plant-specific, which would be more actually mimics, very specific, your plant. And then we had actually segmented into a third sector, which is more the immersive, newer kind of technologies that you're seeing today. And that's where you're going to see a lot of the changes, I think, in the next few years around operator training simulators. And a lot of that has to do with some of the changes that are taking place in the market. And we'll talk about that. So some examples, just some of the things that I saw when I was doing the study and the survey was, it seemed to start with the one in the corner, which is this one here, I guess, which is a laser. This is the pilot training. And that's kind of where operator training simulators kind of came out of, that industry where the pilots are actually trained on operator training simulators. And then I saw some of these. This is immersive technologies where they're using these in mining because they actually have to train the people to get on the equipment and they immerse them into it. And then some other examples of immersive down here in a plant that was somebody gave me. And then this came out of the hydrocarbon processing. So you can see there's all different types of training, and they're getting much more realistic, which that's the part that I really thought was impressed by. So some of the technologies that you've seen today, like the cloud, like the 3D visualization, and the mobility, and the smart some of the things that you're hearing and all these things, the Internet of Things, all of these things are actually enabling the operator training simulators, the interoperability, and also in the visualization, which is a big thing. So I just mentioned that a minute ago, but you'll see in all these really, really, like almost realistic visualization. And it has a lot to do with how we learn, you know, that these are enablers for people. And I'm sure a lot of you people are familiar with this. This is from the National Training Laboratories Institute. And it was kind of what I thought, and most people probably thought this too, but this actually proves it. They did a survey and a study of average student retention rates. What they found is that after 2 weeks, you tend to remember, if you read something, you only really remember 10% of what we read. I like to think I remember more, but this was a test that was done. I'm not going to argue with it. I like to think I'm smarter than that, but okay, so hearing words. When you hear someone speak, you remember 20% of what you hear. If you see something, you watch a movie, see a demonstration, you'll remember 50% of what you hear, if it's combined with seeing and hearing. If you participate in a discussion, like today you participate, or you give a talk even, or you give something, you work with a team or something like that, you'll remember 70% of what you say. And then, if you're doing something dramatic, so we've got to be dramatic, presentations, and you're simulating something or the real thing, and this is why simulators are so important, and that is that they say you actually remember 90% of what you do and say. And if you think about it in your life, the things that you remember the most vividly are things that you actually went and saw. It's not things you read in a book, it's things you did in a plant, things you did in your life, places you went. You remember them much more vividly excuse me, than if you just read something. So that's where we want to be, and that's why simulators are so important. I get a little thing in my throat. So, and I suppose if you're here, you probably already think that they're important. But I just wanted to review that with everybody because it's an interesting. I thought it was, for me, it was interesting. It might not be for you as much, but. And then they also did another thing about applied behavioral science. Did a survey, and they said that 78% will retain the information for simulation. So we do know that simulation is a much better way to learn for people. And the difference between knowing and doing, and that's how you're more successful. And that's why OTS is so important. So that was one thing that, for me, was really interesting. But what's driving? What are some of the factors behind what's driving operator training simulation? Because the market is increasing. The current annual growth rate is over 10% for operator training purchases. Well, some of it, and we identified just a few of the things here, the changing demographics, and we've heard about that over and over again at this meeting. So we're old. The average engineer is my age, probably, or maybe plus or minus 5 years, is my guess. So that's a fact. So they are going to be replacing the generation that kind of learned from the ground up as the new technologies were coming out and so on. And then they also say we have this new millennial generation that's the tech-savvy worker generation. So they want things that are more visual and more like the Apple iPad and your iPhone. That's the kind of generation that they're catering to. Then we also have the issues around emerging economies and globalization. And what I was told is that in Asia, people change jobs every 2 years because the job market's great. They get trained as an operator, and that's it. They're out the door, and they need to get retrained again. And then operational challenges. In my life, when I was growing up, the first 20 years, we saw maybe a hurricane and maybe we hadn't really seen anything until like after 9/11. It's like all of these disastrous things have happened. We've had tsunamis, 2 of them that I know of. They had the Bali one and the one in Japan, and maybe there was another one. But we also had hurricanes. We've had very strange weather and disaster patterns. We had the Gulf Coast disasters. We've had a lot of things that have affected people. And they've also affected how people are manufacturing. And even when people were talking about safety plans and disaster planning years ago, I just thought, well, what disasters? Were they talking about a flood or something? That was the worst thing that really had happened. So it's really a changing world today. So one of the other things that came up, and this came up several times, is I spoke to some engineers, and I also spoke to the operators. And one of the things the engineers kept saying is most operators do not feel that they're adequately trained. They feel like if they go into a plant on any particular day, they just don't feel comfortable with if something was going to happen. And one operator told me a lot of them go in and they say a prayer every day. It's basically, please don't let something happen on my watch, which is really awful when you think about it, because you're setting these people up. And one engineer said, there's no way I would ever want to be an operator. He said, it's just too much responsibility, too much weight on my shoulders. And most operators only get 3 or 4 days of training a year, and they just don't feel comfortable with if something happened. They really don't know if they'd be able to respond. And so if you really got to know the operators well, they would probably tell you this, if they were being honest. Except in maybe some plants where they're really adequately trained, they feel very confident. And that's one of the things that simulators do is they do build confidence in somebody, that they could handle most adverse conditions. You know, not necessarily all, because you can't have zero risk, as somebody said during the cybersecurity session earlier today. But the reality is that you have to be able to prepare for virtually anything. And so some of the things that these people were mentioning to me was, well, inadequate training, and I listened to all the different things they said, leads to ineffective responses from the operator. It also leads to improper responses. They just don't know if this is the right way to respond, what to do. It also leads to equipment failures in some cases, or they just don't know how to respond. So really, that results in production delays, reduced quality, unplanned downtime, even injury, and sometimes you see, or even worse, people said it could even lead to fatalities, and it has led to fatalities. We do know that. And also on the other side is the regulatory fines and liabilities, so there is a cost associated with it. And also the other thing with having an operator that's inadequately trained is that they don't know how to improve performance in your plant. So it can actually reduce your profits and your performance, and you can tie it to that as well. So training can help enforce good behavior. So that's a message really that I was getting from doing this. So a little bit more about the study, a couple more facts, is what we did with the study was we divided it into different categories like generic, high fidelity, immersive, different types of visualization, the revenue for software, maintenance services, and also, so what suppliers are doing in these areas. So you can look at the different industries and the categories that we normally look at. So, and then I just showed a few examples of the visualization, the kind of things that we saw and we were looking at. One is like, for example, one of the things I noticed is that you have something that's 3D, but now you go to color, it's much more different. You can see a lot with the color, unless, of course, you're colorblind. But I thought that was a really interesting example of how it brings out the visualization and how it helps you really see what's going on. And then they have like 2D visualization. Those are kind of standard. That's what we've all seen those. The 3D, you go from 2D to 3D. Then you go to a little bit more visualization, some of the diagrams and things that you see. Then we've even gotten into avatars today. I don't know how many people have seen them, but they actually have operator training with avatars. So you make a little avatar. It's much more immersive. They can actually walk through the plant. I've seen people walking through platforms with an avatar so they can actually see the platform before they even go there. They know where all the safety valves are and those things before they even get into the plant. So it's a very good way to learn. So there's one too. And then somebody told me now they can have multiple avatars that talk to each other. So what are some of the factors contributing to the growth of this market? Well, the ability to respond to the process is probably, to me, that's foremost. But the reality is expansion and new facilities are a lot of the drivers behind. That's probably the number one reason that people buy an OTS system, because it helps them get the operators up to speed really quickly. It helps them even with the checkout and some other things. So that's probably number one. But also safety concerns. And being able to avoid accidents is a really big part, and you can attribute it to a potential profits and potential financial information, and we can talk a little bit about that, and also regulatory concerns. So really, some of the biggest drivers are probably that if you train and operate it adequately, they can improve performance, and it can be tied to profits. But it's also the safety issues and the compliance and the other issues that we've already mentioned. So one of the other things that I saw was some people are actually investing in gaming, and this is actually Chevron, and they have a game, but it's not around operator training, but I have seen some that are actually in a plant, and they do training. And I actually think that's a really good way with this, the new tech-savvy generation. They would like this because, and that's also a way to get them enticed to want to be operators because, here they can train and they can learn about how the energy interacts with the plant and the costs and how do you increase performance, and you could even make it more interactive than that. And I think these are going to get better and better and better. So I think you're going to see a lot in this area as well in the future. And this was I was going to show a video, but I think that we have a lot of experts here in this room, and I think that of the simulators that are being used in the mining industry, that these are more for the heavy equipment, because I didn't want to use one that was more in the manufacturing end, just because I didn't want to people to think I was promoting it. But then you can see that there's a lot going on in this area, and so I think operator training simulators, the market's going to keep growing in the next few years. And this is I'm just going to show like one or two charts from the report, and one of them is we show the difference between the 3D and the virtual, and you can see that the biggest markets are going to be in the newest opportunities for suppliers and where end users are investing is in the simulation, the 3D area, the virtual area. So, and then the markets, where you're going to see the most growth, or at least right now we're seeing the growth, is the number one is the petrochemical market, followed by the oil and gas market. So, in the chemical market's right behind that. And I actually thought it would be the electric power, but, I was kind of surprised. Oh, actually, it is electric power. I couldn't see that for some reason. I was thinking it was electric power because it's the nuclear industry that's driving the electric power industry, and that's because of regulations. So some of the other things that we investigated in the technologies is being able to integrate all of the new technologies like the 3D, the visualization, and all these immersive technologies that we're seeing. And then people were talking about they're actually using scorecards. So one of the ways that they're looking and measuring the operators and to seeing if they're trained well is to use these scorecards, which I think is a good idea, but I think it needs to be integrated into the technology so that you can keep track of what they're doing. So I do think that's a real positive thing. And also, the other part you're seeing is the improvement in the interface and the tools for a digital savvy generation worker. And then the last part, and this actually came out of a couple of people were talking about the incident at the nuclear plants in Japan with the tsunami. They said that one of the things that came out of that is a lot of these operators were just trained on specific units. So they didn't make the integration to they weren't able to make that integration to some of the other units, and they need to be able to know how their actions are going to affect other units. So they need to be an interactive training. So those are just a few of the things. We also did a survey on operations manager that was actually started by Dick Hill, who's in the back of the room. And we asked a number of questions about operations management, and I'm just going to show you a few, and it's a strategy report that we just actually released, the part one of it. We actually have a part two that's on abnormal conditions that will be coming out later. But if anybody wants a copy of this strategy report, if you give me your business card at the end, I'd be glad to email it to you. But this report, 60% were from the refining, chemicals, and energy industry, which is the leading industries for operator training simulators. So I'm just going to show you a couple of the results, not the whole report or anything, because I think you guys can read it if you're interested in it. But one of the things that someone made, there's a graying in America that our plant, the average age is 50, which is just what I said. That's the average age of an engineer. And other crafts, which is other industries besides the nuclear, are very similar, which I agree with that. And I thought that was an interesting statement, and it kind of summarizes what's happening and what the drivers are behind operator training simulators. So one of the things, too, is, the number one people were from refining, 2 chemicals and petrochemicals, and then lastly was the 18% were from the electric power generation, which is how we divide our studies up. So the job functions and the geographic regions where people were from, the majority were from the plant, manufacturing, and operations, which is as expected. The next group came from operations and then engineering, and it was pretty much as expected, I think, pretty much there. We also asked the geographic regions. We unfortunately probably had 67% from North America. I would have liked to have seen more from Europe as well, because I think that they're probably looking in the same area in other parts of the world as well. So some of the things about training, well, what percent of the company revenue training budgets do they spend? And most people spend less than 3% for training. And we also asked which department owns the training, and most people said that the operations for training operators is on operations, which is as expected. Human resources also gets involved in many cases as well. So that was pretty much half of the group. Nobody in the automation group owns the operator training budget. So we also asked, if you have an operator training qualification program, do you consider it strategic to your business? And I thought this was interesting. I was glad to see that almost 68% said, yes, it is strategic to our business. Operator training is strategic. And I don't know how many people in this room would agree with that. I'd like to hear afterwards, or maybe we can discuss that as well. But one of the things with operator training, to me, is it's a motivator for people. And it's a people issue. We talked about people, information, and processes. Well, to me, operator training is all of that, but it's also a people issue. And if they feel confident, they don't feel like, oh, please, not on my watch. Don't let anything bad happen. If they think, I've been well trained, I feel confident I could deal with just about anything. That's what you want to instill. So we also asked about trying employment bonuses, operational skills to bonuses. And 60% said they're not doing that, which I thought was pretty interesting. We also asked about justifying operator training incident management. And if people have an incident, do they identify the root causes of the incident? And if so, do you justify the expenditures? And most people do that. Yes, they do. They look at the expenditures of an incident and they try to justify that to the training, try to link it back. So that's a good thing, I think. Then we also asked if the operator training simulators are regulated or mandated in your industry. And we were told yes, that actually no, operator training simulators are not regulated in most of the people, which I thought was quite interesting because 18.2% I think were from the nuclear industry, so I'm thinking that was pretty much the rest of them. There was only a few other people that felt that maybe they had corporate mandates so that were regulated. So what are some of the annual benefits? This was actually in hydrocarbon processing, and they talked about the number one benefit being planned turnaround time, being a reduction in planned turnaround time, that you can do that with operator training simulators. I think that I was talking to one of the other experts, and they said the figures they thought were a little high, so that might be true. I say yes over here. It might be true, but how do you justify it? But this gives you a good example of maybe coming up with some figures, and they talked about how they took a percentage of, and how they did it, like 15% of turnaround time they attributed to certain amounts, and so on, etc. So if you want to take a look at the article, you can. But in some of the other areas, reduction in abnormal situation, improving advanced process control, so improving performance, and then reduction in capital equipment, and so so this was for a refinery. So I guess one of the things that came up, and we can talk about this during the panel session, is how do you justify an OTS? And one person told me that there's no way I can justify. I can't tie it to the cost. I got a guy right here saying yes. But the thing is, there are some ways, and one of the things I would tell people that they're having trouble doing this is to sit down with some of the financial people. Make a list of some of those areas, the unplanned changes, the abnormal conditions, things that happen in your plant. Come up with maybe some rough estimates, but go to the financial people, work with them, because I did a project with some of the financial people, and we integrated them into our team. And I'll tell you, it was a lot easier, because some of these people are brilliant, and they can actually help you come up with a figure that they think would be very realistic as to how you tie operator training into your project. And there's other things, too, you can try it into today, like your disaster planning strategy, and into your regulatory compliance solutions, and into your disaster avoidance and some of the safety issues that we're hearing so much about today. So that's true, though. And the thing is, training can be expensive, but, what's a life worth, really? So are we getting smarter with OTS? So that's the question of the day, and we can talk about that during the panel. I see a no here. But so I guess that's the question I'm going to throw out. And I see a no. Do I see any yeses? So do I see any maybes? But the one thing for sure is with operator training simulators, you do retain information better. You can work to try to justify it, and people are working on that. I'd like to see some of the suppliers. I'd like to see them out there try to incorporate some of that into their OTS system so that, that it makes it easier for the end users to evaluate and also to figure out what the true cost of an OTS is, and how they can justify it to their management, because that's probably the biggest thing. We heard a guy today, he said, oh, it all came down to cost. I heard that in one session today. So cost is a reality, but at the same time, training is important as well. So, you have to kind of balance the risks. I guess it's risk avoidance. So, okay, well, that was pretty much my presentation. Just, at the end, if you want a copy of that report, you can ask questions. We're going to be gathering questions, and